Now, contained in the Washington Consensus was a clause to liberalize the foreign exchange market. And when I went to the fund, IMF, in 2017, I spoke to a couple of their lawyers at the time, and they themselves admitted fault to pressure in Jamaica to institute the Washington Consensus without the necessary controls. What ensued? Because they forced us to, instead of taking our time to liberalize the foreign exchange market so the exchange rate can move from, at the time it was 4-1 to 5-1 to 6-1. The currency moved from 6-1 in 1990 to 25-1 in 1992 by the time Manley settled into power. Which means that if you owe somebody $6 today and tomorrow you owe them $24, 6 4s, 24. It means that the exchange rate moving from $6 to 1 to $25 to 1 saw every person's debt in foreign currency increase fourfold. So the major banks who borrowed in foreign currency, Eagle Bank, Central National Bank, Citizens Bank, these banks that borrowed heavily in foreign currency, found themselves, instead of having a debt of $6, now has a debt of $25. 4 times more. And that means the entire banking system was going to crash. The entire banking system, because of the debt imposed on us by the IMF, was about to crash. And what had to happen? The People's National Party had to take decisive action. And it was at that time when we decided that we need a commission to help the financial sector adjust to what happened due to the Washington Consensus. And that is when FINSAC was established. So FINSAC was established as the Financial Sector Adjustment Company to adjust the financial sector to the fact that the IMF imposed the Washington Consensus and push up the debt of our major banks. And in an economy, if your banks fail, all the economy fails. So we had to take decisive action. That decisive action meant that that financial sector adjustment company had to help the banks remodel and liquidate. And that is how Jamaica was able to cope with the atrocities of what the Jamaica Labour Party did to us throughout the 1980s. So when you hear them speak about FINSAC and they want the FINSAC report, the FINSAC report is no indictment on us. It is an indictment on the Jamaica Labour Party who pushed the country in the position that we found ourselves in by the early 1990s. That's why they won't publish it. And that is why, they won't publish it. Because they know that they only can put a mirage in front of your face. That it is the People's National Party who, yes, instituted FINSAC, but why? The why has to come before what exactly was done. And that is why we cannot get the FINSAC report.
Finally, for me, the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister hammered home this matter of what FINSAC did in terms of the impact on the country's debt and your potential role in that debacle in the 1990s. Do you accept that narrative as put forward? And do you feel that FINSAC, as it played out in the 1990s, was damaging to the Jamaican economy?
What? I had no role in FINSAC whatsoever. I was in the private sector there. I was an attorney at law, and I was involved in business as well.
Madam Speaker, the root cause of the crisis, the FINSAC crisis, was the premature policy decisions of the PNP to liberalize the foreign exchange market in 1991 without the necessary preconditions such as reserves in place. In other words, they went to party but didn't have any money. This triggered a rapid depreciation of the Jamaican dollar and skyrocketing prices, with inflation reaching 80% in 1991 and 40% in 1992. Not having any rent money to ward off speculators, the government then tried to protect the exchange rate through exorbitant interest rates. As a result, productive enterprises, especially small businesses, were unable to service their loans, and the loans became non-performing. Mounting non-performing loans and loan defaults then caused banks to collapse. Madam Speaker, the PNP's high interest rate policy created a two-tiered economy. One where cash-rich speculators thrived while productive businesses drowned in insurmountable debt. This led to what a prominent member of the PNP described as the largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich since slavery. Madam Speaker, who were the beneficiaries of this wealth transfer from the poor to the rich? Is there anyone in this House who was a part of this ill-conceived policy, whose business it was to profit from the great transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich?
I had no role in FINSAC whatsoever. I was in the private sector there. I was an attorney at law, and I was involved in business as well. Because although I came into the party through Dr. Omar Davis, because I knew him in the financial sector, where I had been like one of the leading corporate lawyers in Jamaica and very involved in financial engineering. And so when he was Minister of Finance, a lot of the things that required industry input, I was one of the representatives of the industry that he would deal with. I got to know him through that. And that's how I got into the PNP, really, through my relationship with him. So in the 90s, I was really focused on building that business and making a success of it with my partners.
Yeah.
And, it was a listed company. We're managing a lot of people's savings.
Yeah.
So we had to take it very seriously. It was not, it wasn't something to play around with.
No,
So
I remember the ads, Daring, Bunting, and Golding. It's
I
black
remember them
and
too.
the light. It's like,
Yeah.
what is this company? It's like, you're poor. Relax.
Well, some people,
need to know you're
some
poor.
people started small and made a good money out of it, including our staff.
Yeah.
I had no role in FINSAC whatsoever. I was in the private sector there. I was an attorney at law, and I was involved in business as well.
The fallout was immense. It is estimated that over 40,000 businesses collapsed, wiping out entrepreneurs and leaving thousands destitute. This decimated the manufacturing sector in Jamaica. Burdened with high-cost debt, unable to retool to keep competitive, many factories closed during this period. We recall companies like Thermoplastic, Highgate Food Products, Home Electrics, and others too numerous to name that could not survive the inhospitable climate that FINSAC created.
FINSAC ensured that in a crisis in the financial sector, depositors didn't lose any money. Pensioners didn't lose any money. Persons who had insurance didn't lose any money. That was the purpose of FINSAC. And yes, it cost the country quite a lot of money, and we took time to work our way out of that.
The high interest rate policy of Omar and the PNP has been one of the most destructive forces in the history of Jamaica's economy. It led to the financial sector collapse, where over 40 financial institutions went. Entrepreneurs that previously had been heralded by him, some of them are exiles abroad now. Many entrepreneurs lost their businesses. Many companies that were over 100 years old in Jamaica were destroyed and sold to foreigners. That is the legacy. And even one of his colleagues who sits in this room today described it as the greatest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich since the abolition of slavery.
We're now at 68% debt to GDP ratio. That era is long gone. I had no role in FINSAC whatsoever. I was in the private sector there. I was an attorney at law, and I was involved in business as well. So, that was an environment we all had to navigate who were in the sector at that time. And we did it skillfully enough that we never had to ask FINSAC for any support. Although I came into the party through Dr. Omar Davis because I knew him in the financial sector, where I had been like one of the leading corporate lawyers in Jamaica and very involved in financial engineering. And so when he was Minister of Finance, a lot of the things that required industry input, I was one of the representatives of the industry that he would deal with. I got to know him through that. And that's how I got into the PNP, really, through my relationship with him. So in the 90s, I was really focused on building that business and making a success of it with my partners.
Yeah.
And, it was a listed company. We're managing a lot of people's savings.
Yeah.
So we had to take it very seriously. It was not, it wasn't something to play around with.
No,
So
I remember the ads, Daring, Bunting, and Goldings.
I
Black
remember them
candle,
too.
Yeah.
light. It's like, what is this company? It's like, you're poor.
Yeah.
Relax.
Well, some people started small and made a good money out of it, including our staff.
Financial shock, which began in 1991 in Jamaica, ballooned unchecked over the next 5 years until it exploded with a catastrophic bang in 1996. The explosion left shrapnel scattered over the financial landscape, which still impacted on the economy so many years later. My sister Valerie Dixon,
So what I want to bring out this morning is that a lot of people do not understand where this thing came from. And I want to just read a little from an appendix that was written in the Observer some time ago. It says, when Omar Davis, then PNP finance minister in the 1990s, began the process of dismantling the Central National Bank, it was done immediately after the Don Crawford-run entity had bought a significant sum of US dollars at a few dollars more than the price that the official exchange rate indicated. The bank did nothing which other banks were not doing in a time when an inept PNP government was struggling with managing a market economy which it knew little or nothing about. What the sale of those dollars did was reveal that the very same finance ministry was covertly, that means underground, dispatching agents with huge stacks of cash in the trunks of their cars to buy US dollars at prices above the official exchange rate. The money was stolen eventually. With blood rushing to its head when this action was revealed, an embarrassed PNP government set about withdrawing public funds from the Central National Bank, making it publicly known. And in the process, it started or triggered a run on the bank which was seemingly designed to end its life. That, however, is a sad history for the most progressive bank existing in Jamaica at that time.
I had no role in FINSAC whatsoever. I was in the private sector there. I was an attorney at law, and I was involved in business as well. Because although I came into the party through Dr. Omar Davis, because I knew him in the financial sector, where I had been like one of the leading corporate lawyers in Jamaica and very involved in financial engineering. And so when he was Minister of Finance, a lot of the things that required industry input, I was one of the representatives of the industry that he would deal with. I got to know him through that. And that's how I got into the PNP, really, through my relationship with him.
Whilst most people know Mark because of his being a top lawyer and a key man in the financial sector, comrades, this man is all round. He's multifaceted. I want you, comrades, to join me and go with Golden.
I had no role in FINSAC whatsoever. I was in the private sector there. I was an attorney at law, and I was involved in business as well.
At home, Manly's socialist dream had become a middle-class nightmare. If you don't like it, Manly told them, there are 5 flights a day to Miami. In the months that followed, thousands took his advice. Planes were packed with Jamaica's middle classes, taking their money with them.
most of these were of the entrepreneurial class. So we had the horrendous picture of the country sliding into 8 years of negative growth, record high inflation, record high unemployment.
With the wealthy leaving in droves and US aid cut from $13 million to a mere $4, Manley was in deep trouble. Michael had enough grassroots support to win the 1976 election, but the crisis still deepened. Foreign businesses found more friendly places to invest their money.
They frightened away every foreign investor that we had, and a lot of local investors at the same time, because they were threatened. They were told that they were not the sort of people that were not wanted here, that Jamaica was going to be a socialist country, and that the capitalist was no longer welcome. America was called a wicked imperialist capitalist nation and exploiter, and the whole ambience of the place was very frightening to any kind of investment.
Of greater concern, the urban poor were losing patience. Michael Manley had no choice but to bow to US pressure as his socialist dream of a free, equal, independent Jamaica crumbled before his eyes. He went to the World Bank and effectively handed over the running of the country to the IMF. Jamaica's future would now be in the hands of foreigners.
He was, you know, sort of a proud person who felt that although your country was small, that you had rights like everybody else. And I think he realized the extent to which these rights were going to be withdrawn.
Less than 20 years of independence had brought the island back to financial slavery. The IMF loan of $29 million was not enough and came with strings attached, which put an end to social reforms and led to shortages.
We can't get oil, we can't get detergent, we can't get flour, we can't get rice. Everything on a whole you can't get.
Some crazy reason I chose to have a baby in that 1980 election year. And he was premature. He was in the hospital for about 3 weeks in the intensive care unit at the hospital for premature babies. And I was able to interact with working class mothers on a day-to-day basis. They'd all come, we'd all come to visit the baby and our babies, and you know, we'd talk. And one of the things we talked about was the shortage of foodstuff.
I saw people who were willing to die just to free Jamaica at that time, because the people felt that they were in bondage. There are people who left Jamaica, who died abroad, very, very unhappy and very sad. There are people who still live abroad, who swear they'd never come back to Jamaica because it was such a bad experience for them. It was a downfall. I'm telling you, it was a period where people hated him. They really hated him.
In 1988, Gilbert came. And prior to Gilbert coming, because they tried to hold on to the value of the dollar so much, our reserves, which is what we use to purchase foreign goods, the US reserves that we have went into negative. So Jamaica found itself in a negative position, cannot access money to participate in foreign currency transactions. And it was very bad. The IMF came in and they said that, listen, this government needs shaking up. And the GLP government ignored them. Ignored them. Then, to make things worse, Hurricane Gilbert came in 1988 and ravaged the country. In order to rebuild, to get the equipment that we need, to get the cheap energy that we need to rebuild, we had to leverage the IMF once more. At that time, Michael Manley came into power again. And he came in and inherited a country that was destroyed throughout the 80s by the Jamaica Labour Party.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister, Edward Philip George Siaga.
Manley was on the ropes. In a bitter contest, he finally conceded to his rival, Edward Siaga. America breathed a sigh of relief as Edward Seaga put the ghost of socialism to rest.
There was just $11 million in the Bank of Jamaica when we took over. We wanted, first of all, to restore the bridges that had been burnt by Manley with our traditional partners.
For some people, it was like heaven on earth. Things had gone back to normal. All this talk about change and about blackness and about better and so on was eliminated, and we were back to the 60s where we should always have been. Money would flow from the United States, investment would flow, and life would be as it should be.
The US lavished over $200 million of aid on Seaga's government. With this new investment, business began to flourish.
In the 80s, the atmosphere was more pro-business, and consequently you had a lot of remigration, people coming back home, business people, some professionals. But I think what is really important is that there's very, very much a good atmosphere of encouraging foreign investment. It's stable, the people that you can work with are available.
Butch Stewart became a successful entrepreneur in tourism, pioneering the Sandals Resort and later taking over the national airline. But his homegrown success was exceptional. Most of the new businesses which sprung up in Jamaica were owned by foreigners. Multinationals flooded in. Brands and chains began to dominate the place. The land of jerk chicken was sold the Kentucky dream.
Mr. Seaga was a fantastic salesman. He had the respect internationally. And so he was able to convince the private sector, both locally and overseas, to invest in Jamaica. He had programs, he had good policies.
On the same tarmac that Fidel had once embraced his comrade Michael Manley, Ronald Reagan heralded a new alliance between Jamaica and Washington.
The success of our venture depends on cooperation. And cooperation is easier between friends who share the same ideals.
The Reagan administration had an excellent relationship with Mr. Seaga, with Jamaica.
Thank you all very much.
It was a wonderful feeling because to me, it made the statement that yes, Jamaica had once again arrived. We had once again been accepted into the international arena. And we got a lot of assistance through that administration. The darker-skinned Jamaican has become more confident and has become more domineering and will not put up with a lot of what would take place in the earlier days.
The experience of the Jamaican people has been exceptionally rich. Experience in terms of oppression, experience in terms of reform, experience in terms of culture, in sport, broadly, highly experienced people. And therefore, we are now on the verge of that experience being brought to bear on the direction of the country.
Jamaicans essentially are people who want their freedom, and they want to retain their freedom, and they will die fighting for their freedom.
From the university to the sports field, great men and women in arts, education and politics have their roots here. A small island of some 2.5 million people has made a big impact overseas.
The IMF having recognized that Jamaica needs this foreign currency desperately imposed on us what we call the Washington Consensus. So you can go and research the Washington Consensus. It was a 10-point plan aimed at moving Jamaica out of a negative reserve position to putting Jamaica on a positive developmental growth path. Throughout the 90s, Percival James Patterson took over for Michael Manley because, as you know, circumstances. And Percival James Patterson was one of the best leaders we saw as it relates to infrastructural development, as it relates to breaking down monopolies and oligopolies that existed to stifle the growth of the average Jamaican. Black man time now was the slogan because he believed in the power of you, not the power of a few rich people or the power of a few people, but the power of each and every Jamaican, where you are, how you are. He wanted you to have better, not just for yourself, but for your children and your children's children. Over 17 schools he built up to now. Andrew Haughton now build one. How dare he compare himself to the great one? How dare he